This probably goes without saying, but most city planning is done by cities. However, there are other layers of government that have an influence on city planning. In this video, I'm going to describe those layers of government, the relationships between them, and their effect on city planning. First things first, what layers of government am I talking about?
We have the federal government in Washington, D.C., we have the state governments, then regional agencies, then local governments, and finally special districts. Let's start at the top. Unlike some other countries, in the United States, the federal government does not have the power to directly do planning in cities. It's not in the Constitution. In fact, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution says that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. The federal government didn't call dibs, basically, and it was left to the states. That's not to say the federal government doesn't influence planning and city development. They just can't meddle with zoning codes or other city ordinances or plans. What they can do is provide funding to cities that come with strings attached. One of the biggest federal policies targeting cities over the last 100 years was urban renewal. This was the federal government's attempt to revitalize downtowns, remove slums, and build new housing. Urban renewal has a complicated and generally negative legacy, but it's a great example of how the federal government can influence cities. The federal government provided billions of dollars to local agencies established to spend money on urban renewal projects. This is often how federal dollars flow. They go to local or state agencies who exercise some local control over how the money is spent. Urban renewal is just one example. The Federal Highway Program, the Endangered Species Act, and the Tiger Infrastructure Grants are all federal policies that have an impact on cities. Let's move down a layer and talk about the states. As I mentioned before, the federal government can't directly influence local planning decisions, but states can. As a result, city planning can vary quite a bit between states. In Oregon, for example, the state requires every city to establish an urban growth boundary designed to limit suburban sprawl and increase urban densities. In this model, the state is an extremely active participant in local planning. In many states, local control is cherished and the state has a relatively small influence on local planning affairs. Sandwiched between the state and local level are the regional agencies. With the exception of Portland, Oregon, and the Twin Cities in Minnesota, regional agencies aren't governments, but they play a significant role in local planning efforts at a scale somewhere between the state and local level. Regional agencies were originally established at the behest of the federal government. The feds realized that it made more sense to dole out federal highway and transportation money to regions as opposed to each city and suburb separately. In many areas of the country, that's all regional agencies are. They produce regional transportation plans, receive money from the federal government, and implement the plans through infrastructure projects. In places like California, however, they have morphed into agencies that engage in region-wide housing and land use planning, as well as transportation planning. Recent California legislation puts them on the forefront of the state's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well.
The problem with regional agencies is that they don't have the same authority as governments. Their influence primarily comes from the money they can distribute to cities and counties in the region for transportation projects. They have an influence to be sure, but it's somewhat limited.
Now let's move to local government. In most of the United States, local governments consist of cities and counties. Most people think cities reside within counties, which is true, but from a planner's point of view, cities and counties are co-equal governments that have their own distinct territories. City governments plan for the areas within their city limits, and counties plan for areas outside the city limits. Counties do not impose plans on the cities within its boundaries, but merely does the planning for unincorporated areas. And in many ways, city and county planning is similar, particularly in areas where a lot of people live in unincorporated suburbs surrounding larger cities. The entire Las Vegas Strip is in unincorporated Clark County, Nevada, not in the city of Las Vegas, for example. Finally, we arrive at special districts. This one may be a bit of a head-scratcher. What is a special district? Special districts are units of government that are independent from state and local governments and provide services to citizens. Common types of special districts include airport districts, cemetery districts, fire protection districts, harbor and port districts, healthcare districts, irrigation districts, library districts, mosquito and pest abatement districts, reclamation and levee districts, recreation and park districts, resource conservation districts, sanitation districts, transit districts, utility districts, veterans memorial districts, and water districts. Special districts can cross city and county boundaries, so it may not be totally appropriate to put them at the bottom of the list, but they have a much narrower set of responsibilities than the other government layers.
Those are all the layers of government that have an influence on city planning. As you can see, it's not as simple as the planning department down in City Hall, but it's an entire web of government programs and agencies. It's up to city leaders, community members, and planners to make sure all those layers of government are working together for maximum positive impact.